Okay. Well, we're going to taper down. Last night we talked about the big picture, and tonight we're going to work our way into the ethers in general, and then tomorrow evening we will specialize on the soul ethers for building the soul body, and we will look at techniques for doing that. In the Rosicrucian philosophy, it is stated that there are 4 states of being in the physical world beyond the solids, liquids, and gases. And they are called etheric states. And we have a vehicle of consciousness and expression related to that etheric state, which we call a vital body. Now, the information in this talk, most of it will be directly from the writings of Max Heindel, who founded the Rosicrucian Fellowship, but some of it will be conjecture, some of it will be inference, and some of it will be speculation. I'll try to differentiate what is what, but in the heat of the expression, I just might race on forward. In fact, that's what I've noted about the talk so far. I've been racing an awful lot. The soul body, which is our objective, is only part of our etheric body. Tonight we're going to look at the etheric body as a whole. And we're going to look at a few specialized things, but mostly general features. It's important to get the feel of the entire vital body, because we function in it all the time, and progressively we're going to be doing more and more of that. Now, the seers that formed the Rosicrucian order and the Rosicrucian philosophy state that there are 4 states of etheric being. Proceeding from the most gross to the most rare, they are called the chemical ether, the life ether, the light ether, and the reflecting ether. Different schools of thought have different names for them and different reasons for their names. In some cases, like in Sanskrit, they're part of the language, the way the language itself developed. But we're going to use the simple, direct names given by the Rosicrucian Fellowship. In most cases, the Rosicrucian philosophy names states of being according to their function. And the names for the different ethers are like that. That is the function that they have. That the light ether, one of its primary functions, is carrying light. Now, repeating what we said yesterday, the 4 ethers are part of the physical world. And they are therefore subject to the laws and principles of the physical world. And the physical world is physical. It has what physics calls mass. It is gross. It is substantial. And the chief law that we know, especially as we get older, the chief law that relates to the physical world is gravity. As we get older, we sag. We don't topple into the grave, we sag into the grave. In this regard, Albert Einstein stated in a paper in 1915 that even light is subject to gravity. And in 1919, Arthur Eddington, the British astronomer, proved this during an eclipse by looking at the way light from stars was bent by the sun, and so that a star appeared to be in a place different from where it was normally seen, because the light was being bent as it passed the sun. So this proved the statement of Einstein that light was subject to gravity. Well, in the cosmic conception, in not exactly those terms, it was 1909 6 years before Einstein said that light is subject to gravity. It was right in the Rosicrucian cosmoconception. Not only the light ether is subject to gravity, but even the more rare reflecting ether is subject to gravity. This means that the stuff through which thought comes into our brain is also subject to gravity. This is the reason why some philosophers who want to have a very serene place to do their contemplation or their meditation or whatever they do, why they choose to be at high elevations, like the Tibetan Plateau or up in the mountains, as we see all the jokes in the papers. You know, somebody goes padding up to the top of the mountain to ask the guru the question, and they usually get some kind of silly answer. And that's one of the reasons why they choose to be in high places, because it is a fact, it's something we can't measure with our instruments. It is a fact that heavier thoughts tend to sink. Plato knew this, and in the true Western spirit, he decided to go against the grain. And so when he founded his academy, he built the academy next to a swamp to make sure that they would have plenty of mental resistance to what they were trying to do. Now, the fact that the ethers are part of the physical world helps us to learn by comparison and contrast about the ethers, so that we can understand them without having etheric vision. Uh-oh, he didn't bring the guitar tonight. I'm not going to be roped into I'm not going to be roped into it, he said. I'm sorry I put you on the spot like that.
No, I appreciate it.
I've got an old guitar here that hasn't been played in 20 years. Cliff used to take lessons on playing jazz guitar. Do you still play jazz guitar yet?
I want to get back into it.
Okay.
Actually, a little Brazilian bossa nova guitar, too.
Oh, yeah, okay.
You know what the bossa nova is?
Yeah, I lived in Brazil for a while.
Oh, you were? Oh, yeah. In Rio or?
Near Rio, in a little town called Macaé.
Okay.
Yeah.
I spent a week in Rio, and I spent a few days in Manaus and a few days in Sao Paulo, actually outside of Sao Paulo. All right. So we're going to try to understand the ethers, or some of the general properties of the ethers, by looking at other things in the physical world. For example, there are not uniform laws and principles among the solids, liquids, and gases, but there are some that they have in common and some that are exclusive. For example, both the gases and the liquids are subject to the laws of fluid mechanics. And there are formulae that you can work out and demonstrate this for yourself. But only the gases are subject to Boyle's law. And so it's the same thing with the ethers relative to each other and the ethers relative to the solids, liquids, and gases. Now, light, for example, is impressed on the negative pole of the reflecting ether. Otherwise, the images that we have that are perfectly clear would not be visible to us. There has to be light in our photographic memory, so to speak. But even though the light ether interacts with the reflecting ether in that way, the light ether is not privy to the sympathetic resonance between the mind in the world of thought and the reflecting ether. So some things apply, some things do not apply. Now, some of the characteristics of the ethers are not found in exactly the same way. They're found in different ways than they are in the physical plane. And one that is very different could be called change of state. In the physical plane, there is plenty of change of state. If we take water and have it at a certain temperature and pressure, it becomes gas. Or if we take ice at a certain temperature and pressure, it reaches what is the point of fusion or the relative heat of fusion, and it becomes liquid. But it's by applying heat, which is applying energy, which is applying something from the ethers itself, we can change the state of the solids, liquids, and gases. And the elements or compounds that are in the solids, liquids, and gases. But there's no way that you can heat chemical ether and get life ether. It just doesn't work that way. Now, there are very deep cosmological principles whereby the different ethers or the life that is in the different ethers does change state, but that's way beyond what we're talking about here. Some forms of the ethers that produce forms in the physical plane can endure all of the changes of state. And the very best example is found with frost flowers, if you know what frost flowers are. If you don't have the modern kind of window, but you have the old single pane glass window, when it gets cold outside and there's moisture inside of a room, the frost forms on the inside of the window. And if you note carefully, and there have been experiments that have been done with this, that crystalline forms that form in 2 dimensions on the window are like the leaves of plants. And they are like the leaves of plants that are in the room, or that have been cooked in the room, so that you can have frost flowers. If somebody's smoking, you'll see tobacco patterns in the frost flowers. This is to say that the original matrix or the original form that formed the plant, the life ether, has an affinity with water, and it stays in the water even when that water becomes vaporous and then is recondensed as frost on the window pane. So we can see that that some things can be carried all the way through the ethers. You stub your toe, and the experience of stubbing your toe or feeling a substance and feeling its nature, that can be carried all the way back to the reflecting ether, so that at another time in life, if you learn how to do it, you can call back the picture and you can re-experience that same thing all over again, sometimes with accuracy and relevance to other things around the moment greater than you realized it in the initial experience. So, what we're trying to get at is that the ethers themselves do change, and they're capable, in some cases, of maintaining forms within the states of change that they go through, or that a given form can be carried through various etheric states and remain intact.
Is that the principle of homeopathy?
No. I am not completely sure about the principle of homeopathy, and I've talked to a lot of homeopathists about it, because they claim that the potencies of homeopathy, you don't even have to do the shaking personalized, which would mean that the etheric energy from your body would go into the potentization. But I don't know whether, because they do it with machines now, almost nobody makes it the old-fashioned way anymore. Do they anymore? Do you know if anybody makes...
No, I think they will do it mechanically.
Yeah, okay. All right. Got to put everybody on the spot at least once. Bob's sitting back there in Buddha fashion. I'll find a way to get to him yet tonight. So, it's very hard to determine what is in the ethers without changing it. This is a problem that science has, that there's no means of measuring energy at a quantum level without changing things. You're part of the equation. And the same thing is true with the ethers. Observation is not passive. Even with etheric vision, you're putting something of yourself into the observation, and that is changing the situation. It is a very sensitive and a very dynamic universe that we live in that is even more than the butterfly effect. Is the cosmos is sensitive to everything that takes place. There are experiments that have been done by Rupert Sheldrake, which any ogler like me knows is true. He did experiments that indicated, and they were tested out, and they had what do they call it when you have somebody in that isn't part of the test? Controls. Thank you. You had to help a senile old man out here. That Rupert Sheldrake did things that indicated beyond a doubt that people know when they're being looked at. They sense it, that they're being looked at. And I'm sure that I've known this for years, for ogling women's fannies, walking down the street. If you're looking at them, they'll take the end of their skirt and they'll pull it down like that. It happens, and it's an unconscious reaction, but you see it over again and again. So this is the kind of universe that we live in. It's a very sensitive universe. Now, one of the properties of this universe of the ethers is that it has both form and flux. Earl was talking about it a little bit yesterday when he was talking about all magic being done by the blood. And the word blood didn't necessarily mean the substance that runs through our veins, but it could mean something like the flow that runs through the life spirit, which in the Bible, for example, it's talked about a great deal. It is consuming the blood and body of Christ. That's not talking about eating the physical body. That is talking about getting the forms from the realm of life spirit and that life that is so much alive that it's almost impossible to comprehend how alive things are in the life spirit. We've all had the experience where we feel more alive than we have ever before, and it doesn't have anything to do with our physical body, because our physical body can be dead tired at the same time. So this presents a difficulty. Scientists who try to measure things in the ethers run into all sorts of problems, and because they're working in the blind, their methods are very indirect. Richard Feynman, the great physicist, he said of this, he says, why does it take us so many hours of computer time to be able to tell which way and where a particle is going when the event takes place in a very small fraction of a second? He says we must be doing something wrong. And he realized how indirect it was what they were doing. And this is why the direct method of developing oneself to develop etheric vision is so much better than working in the dark and trying to measure things that way. It's like the story of Rumi. Rumi told the story of some priests who were trying to raise money, and Rumi lived in Persia, and they went to India and got an elephant and brought it in the dark of night, and then they sold tickets for people to go see the elephant in the tent in the dark. And one person went in and said, when he came out, he says, the elephant is like a temple with great pillars. And another one went in and came out and said, no, the elephant is like a giant fan. And yet another one went in and came out and said that the elephant is like a hose. And Rumi's statement at the end of it was, oh, what a big difference a little light would make. And he was talking about our state in this world not being able to see the reality of all things being connected and looking at things directly. Now, all this is being said because there are these similarities that are encountered by spiritual scientists, that are encountered also by physical scientists. When it comes to describing atoms, they're usually described according to our culture. I think I've mentioned it before that the first time I tasted a mango, I had no way to describe it except relative to something that I had known before, which was a peach. And a mango is a mango, and it's almost defaming a mango to relate it to a peach, but that's what had to be done. And different people, according to their culturalization, describe things from the almost indescribable inner worlds in different ways. For example, Max Heindel, even in the introduction to the Cosmoconception, talks about the way the etheric atom fits into the physical atom is something like a prism being put inside of the atom, like a triangular prism. And you call it a prism because of the way the light is broken up, or the etheric light comes through it. Plato, seeing the same thing, he was a mathematician, and he said the body is guarded by triangles, and he related it all to the triangular shape of the geometry. So it's a cultural phenomenon. Even clairvoyants who study the ethers have a hard time putting things into words. If this room were a little more darkened, and you looked in that corner where you see all three dimensions come together, and you focused on trying to get all three dimensions at the same time, it would take you out of focus of looking at an object. And if you did that, and the room were sufficiently darkened, you would see like little cobwebs of spectra. And you are then beginning to see the ethers that are suspended in space, at least in physical space. So, trying to put these things into words, the description of an atom varies. In some places, for example, Max Heindel says, it is like a wastebasket, a wire wastebasket. Well, all of those wires coming crisscrossing around each other, just like the pictures you see of orbits superimposed on a geographic map, which is exactly what they are. They're the orbits of what are called particles, like electrons or things like that. At other times, they're described in other ways. And it is said they are lit up by a flow or by a flux of etheric energy. And this is something you can feel. There are people who have strong enough auras that can do magnetic healing. They can run their hand over you, and you can feel the energy passing over you if you're sufficiently sensitive to it. There's a place that you can understand it in a very destructive sense right here in Madison. If you go down off of, what's the cross street?
Blount Street?
Yes, right off of Blount Street and the other east-west. If you go in between where Madison Gas and Electric has all of those, I don't know what they are. I guess they're all transformers. You walk down there, and it's strange. You feel the field. It's so strong. It's an electric field, so therefore it's a field that is dying, but you feel it all over your body. Some scientists, even material scientists, are very close. They feel that what are called particles are actually vortices. They're close to the idea of understanding the ether. And what high energy physics is measuring is they're not measuring particles. What they are doing is measuring various different kinds of vortices or whirlpools within a contiguous ether. And the direction of the spin and the tightness and the shape of the spiral are what all of the things that they call charm and charge and things like that. So some physicists are coming very close to this idea. It's not official Rosicrucian philosophy, but this seems to be what Max Heindel is saying. And speculatively, I believe that what the atoms are indeed spiral vortices of various different kinds. In any case, what we're talking about when we're talking about the ethers is we're talking about something alive, something that is energetic, that has both a state of form and it has a state of life. It has a body and blood, so to speak. And that brings us to the next general characteristic of the ethers, which is polarity. And everything that we meet in the cosmos has a paradox about it. In one way, the deeper that we go into materiality, proceeding from the spiritual worlds down into different grades of material, the deeper you go into materiality, the more complex things are, the more ramified things are, the more separate things are, such that we even think that we're separate from each other. And in a physical sense, we are separated from each other. But from a paradoxical point of view, the greater the limitations, the more simple things become. We can apprehend things because they're limited and kept to one thing. For example, if we look at any object in this world, especially if it is an opaque object, we can see it only one way at a time. We can't see it two ways at a time. It's that simple. And if we look at it from different perspectives, we see it in different ways, but we can only see one at a time. And that's one of the purposes, or it's a dual paradoxical purpose of the physical world. It's a proving ground. If we can take a conception from deep in our spiritual being and bring it all the way down through all those limits and objectify it in the dense physical world, we can see it as if it stood outside of ourselves and others can see it, and even devices like cameras can see it. This is a sign that our creative powers are real and genuine. Because we all have a lot of ideas that are pie in the sky that we never really manifest, and they're impossible to manifest. But it's when we carry them out that we find the truth of things. At the same time, the physical world, because it is so simple, and because we can take a measure and we can measure this board and see exactly how long it is, and we can get a very objective understanding of it so that we can mathematically shift it around in our minds and know very definitely what it is like. The objectivity that we learn in this plane is very, very simple. And when we get the grasp of objectivity, we'll be able to expand it back up through the spiritual worlds, and everything will be seen not only with consciousness, enhanced spiritual consciousness, but with self-consciousness and with an objectivity that is provable in a different way of proving things. So it is... It's a wonderful thing, even living in this physical world, even though the body feels like a heavy drag and we'd like to be out there flying around in the ethers. It's a wonderful place to be here. It is indubitable. It's so indubitable that I've had to prove it to myself several times in life. I'm sort of a dreamer. And on 2 occasions, I've walked into lamp poles, thinking about something, being off and away, and kalunk. I knew where I was after that. Now, in this chemical world, things are simple in other ways than just simple perspective. For example, you wouldn't say that a stream is polar, even though that stream runs in one direction. And because a stick is elongated, you wouldn't say that a stick is polar. You can call it a pole, but it isn't polar. You know what a boomerang that doesn't come back is? Stick. Right. It's one of Eddie's jokes. I love the droll jokes like that. However, if we have a bar magnet, it is polar. And a physicist would say that it is due to the fact that those invisible atoms in the iron are polarized so that they're all pointing in one direction. This is just another way of saying that they have something within them that is capable of being polarized. There is something that is polar that can be aligned because of its polarity. A spiritual scientist would be much more specific and say that the polarized etheric atoms are polarized by the flux, which is itself polar. And so that this polarization is something that is common to the etheric states. Whether it is a flow or a flux, it is polar, or whether it is in a form. That form is polar, even though it doesn't carry always all the way into the solids, liquids, and gases. Some elements, because of their evolution and because of what they give to the mineral kingdom by passing through that state, such as iron or dysprosium, which is the most magnetic of all of the elements known, lend themselves very much to polarization. In fact, the Rosicrucian philosophy says, this is a sidelong thing, it says that all of the element mercury is now being polarized. It doesn't say much more about that, and I read science headlines every day, and I haven't seen anything yet that physical science knows that that's happening. So for us, it's in the air, waiting for consideration. So the purpose of the dense physical body and the dense physical world and the stuff that we are in is to provide stable form. The minerals are learning the experience of stability of form. The purpose of the ethers is more active. It's more vital. And in the ethers, you experience vital life that changes almost instantaneously as it goes from form to form or as it works within a form. Now, yesterday when we tried to look at the grand view of things, we looked at the spirit-matter pole as much as we could. In one direction, on the spirit-matter pole, on the other side of the great divide, everything is universal. Everything is very spiritual. The further you go in this direction, the more concrete things become, and form is more important. So in one direction in the creation is meaning, and in the other direction is form. Now the idea of meaning, like in something like the life spirit, everything in the life spirit is internal. Even what the concept or even the experience that we have of externality in the life spirit is internal. Everything it has only a within, and any without is a within, is a without that is within. I don't know how to say it. In this realm, the chemical region of the physical world, it's the other extreme. we only see the without, especially if it's something opaque. If you have a quarter of a pound of butter and you cut it in half to hope to see the inside, all you see is a new outside. Because we see only the surface. We see only the outer part of the form. So between, like in the desire world, there is life and form. But in the desire world and the world of thought, and especially in the higher spiritual worlds, the life and the meaning are more important than the form. Here, the form is the all. The form is exceedingly important here. Between those inner worlds, that is, from the desire world ever more inward, and the outer world only is where the ethers are. And so the ethers have a foot in both worlds. And having a foot in both worlds, they have to be able to have the character of both worlds. If we remember, the ethers are how impulses that come from the spirit work their way out into the physical world for completion, for manifestation, for giving something all the way to the end. And when there are experiences, those experiences are taken from the outer world and they are given to the inner worlds where the understanding is very different than in the outer world. They pass through the ethers, and so the ethers have to have the quality of both the inner worlds and the outer worlds. Now, in the inner worlds, the more spiritual worlds, are more active. That's a description of spirit. If you look in the dictionary, it is that which activates things, that which does things. And the quality of this world is inertia. It just wants to be like me. It wants to be in bed sleeping all the time. And so between the two of them, you have the ethers. And the ethers are a medium of exchange between the inner worlds and the outer worlds. And because the inner worlds are active, they have a positive doing quality, they are positive. And because the material world is formal and it receives all the forces work on the material world, it is negative. So all of the ethers that relate different things that happen in the physical world to the higher spiritual worlds are polarized. This is a unique condition. There's attraction and repulsion in the desire world, but it isn't based on polarity. And so in the ethers you have that kind of polarity. So that's another function that's another general quality that all of the ethers have. Beside fluidity and form, there is polarity.
So, in a physical form, can it suggest in an etheric form?
Can it what?
Can a physical form be created in a way that suggests in an etheric form, or the opposite, like in...
Yes, all the physical forms are precipitated from etheric forms.
So, like in traditional church architecture or something?
Yeah.
When, like, say if you're making something, and you have this feeling like, well, this is how it goes.
Yes.
Is that being sort of transduced from...
Yes. It'll be a little bit of a side trip, and I hope I don't lose my place where I'm going. But let's take something like architecture or sculpture is even better. They are arts of producing form. Now, like if you're sculpting, there's two ways you can do it. You can take clay and you can keep adding clay on, and that's an additive process. But that's not spiritual. It's not like the way things are done in the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, you realize something is there and you take away everything that isn't it. When you're forming a thought, you're asking a question, and in that question you produce a vacuum, and that vacuum gets filled with truth. And in the same way that, like for example, Chinese sculptors used to walk in the woods until they found a piece of wood or a tree that had a certain thing that they wanted to sculpt in it, and they sensed that it was there, and they removed everything that wasn't it so that they could see what the reality was there. And that is the idea that the concept as an etheric form existed in the ethers, even when it was the ethers that formed the piece of wood that was the tree. So yes, everything that becomes a form here comes through that process of a spiritual idea or a spiritual impulse taking on more and more form until finally the physical form that we see here cannot be made without having pre-existed in the inner form. All right.
Wait, but wouldn't it originally come from the world of thought?
Yes, or even way beyond that. Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't like presupposed by the Creator in advance to exist in the etheric world.
No. The etheric world is way down the line. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, now to find myself. The polarization in the ethers is much more extensive, so that if we take the human vital body, it is itself polarized. For example, the life ether that sustains the physical body, that makes it live, that does the growing, and that does the healing, and that does the procreation, that in itself is polarized in general. Everything about the ethers is polar. So that in a male, the etheric body counterbalances the physical body, so the etheric body within is a female. And if you are in a female physical body, the inner body is male, which means that in a woman, there is, and someone who was reborn in a woman's body is a more fair way to say it, that there is a strong positive charge there that is not in a male body. This is proven in quite a few ways. In endurance tests, not in basic strength, but endurance tests, women always win. And the fact is that there are as many male babies born as there are female babies born, but more of the female bodies survive the early time right after birth, so that there are more women in the world than there are men. It's purposeful. Not only is it a counterbalance to the physical world, and not only does it give a cross polarity that makes procreation possible, it goes further into the procreative process. Because if you have that positively charged inner vital body, you can build. And you can build in your womb because you have that kind of positivity. So that even if you could transplant a uterus into a male and put it and inseminate an ovum and put it in that uterus, the male could not, unless they were very exceptional, could not produce a healthy physical body because of that polarization. And the four ethers of the vital body itself are polarized among them, so that the higher ethers, the reflecting and light ethers, are much more positively charged than the lower or the form ethers. So there are replications within the whole etheric body itself. Now we can begin talking a little about individual ethers, I guess. That's where we're at. The chemical ether is what material science calls energy. That's not a really good description. It's a little bit sloppy. It would be nice to say that it was the object of the subject or the study of electromagnetism. However, that definition is not good either. It has its own troublesome parts of it because the ethers are not spectral in the way that electromagnetism is, except in the colors of light that we see. Chemical ether is the force that holds atoms together, as well as the flux of chemical ether is what divides them. So what we're talking about is something that is for the purpose of binding and unbinding forms. It is said that the etheric atoms actually interpenetrate physical particles, physical stuff, and they hold it together. That's what a particle is. It's something very evanescent that is held together, and it's held together by its force. And it isn't necessarily all centripetal or momental force that holds it together. It's also the force that has as its work to produce stable forms. Philosophically, you might say that stable forms are held not just to prove the strength of the creative being that produces the stable form, but they're held so that the being that is evolving through that form can experience it long enough for it to sink in. It's something similar to what takes place in astrology. There are all kinds of astrological aspects that last some only a few seconds, and they're not very important. But when you have something like that Uranus-Pluto square that has been hanging on for a few years now, it's there long enough and it is sustained long enough to have an effect. And this, some of us are slow learners. And in the life way that constitutes the mineral kingdom, there are slow learners there. And this is why the chemical ether is so important in being able to hold forms long enough so that the experience of them can sink into the becoming life that is reflectively working through them. There are a lot of mysteries about all of this because the chemical ether is the same chemical ether whether it's in iron or in iodine. It is something that the same energy can produce different physical states. As far as I can tell, and there have been works that have been written on the subject. I remember one book called Occult Chemistry, in which some etheric clairvoyants took some of each of the atoms and drew pictures of what they saw and how the particles or the vortices were related to each other geometrically, and those geometric relationships were very much like the geometric relationships of astrology, and they produce substances of different character. You can go onto the internet now. I haven't done it for a couple years, but they have more and more pictures of atoms on the internet. And I haven't correlated them yet with the book of Occult Chemistry, but the shapes that they have for each element is distinct. It would be interesting to see if they came up with the same results that people got from clairvoyant investigation. But that's one of the mysteries. The chemical ether, because it is polar, is subject to its own kind of magnetism. It is focused in various different energy levels. Quantum levels is something as simple as heat and going all the way down to what would be called the quantum level of energy. Now, although it isn't described in the Rosicrucian literature, the chemical ether seems to be replenished. And it seems to be replenished by a flux that comes from the sun. Just like the life ether is replenished by a life ether flow that comes from the sun. So, when we're dealing with etheric energy, especially chemical ether energy, from a spiritual point of view, we're looking at it differently than the way physics does. Physics is a fallen science. We were told when we left the Garden of Eden that we would learn about death. And all of our science now is based on death. Some people are starting to think in terms of life, but it's based on death. The second law of thermodynamics states that all energy goes from a higher state of organization to a lower state of organization and eventually ends up in chaos or in disorganization in what is called entropy. So it's a very dismal point of view. In fact, a lot of thermodynamicists, it has one of the highest suicide rates of any of the sciences because the scientists are dealing with that kind of negativity all the time. It gives you a rather pessimistic view of the cosmos. But, so they're dealing only with, like you split an atom and the energy is released and it goes into chaos, or your water goes over, you get energy from a waterfall and you put it through an electric wire and it turns into heat and it gets dissipated into chaos. So science is only dealing with deathly life. They don't deal with live things. They don't deal with etheric energy in wholes and in things that are complete. And this is our objective. We don't want to be stuck with looking only at the entropic view of the universe. We want to look at the living universe. And this is something to keep in mind. It's good to study science. It's helpful. But we cannot prove spiritual science by material science, because that's trying to prove a greater with a lesser. And then there's the fact that there is the introduction by material science of deathly elements which are not true in the realms of life. That's my sermon for tonight.
Richard, quickly, next year is the solar maximum.
Yes.
So its real effect is on the etheric level, even though it may disrupt electromagnetic communication.
Yes. A lot of what physics calls plasma are intense collections of etheric energy. In fact, the prediction is that before Christmas, the poles of the sun will reverse. It happens every 11 years at a solar high, and it's just about to happen right now. So
it'll be interesting.
It'll be interesting whether we feel it or not. I watch every day on the internet for things like that, and I'm going to see if there's, if something really changes in my life, or if I'm sensitive enough to know that's what's going on. Oh boy.
A side question.
Yeah.
Is it possible, or is it even correct to think in terms of being able to devise a way to get sort of mechanical, physical energy out of the ethers?
Yes. But
when
you bring it into this world, you automatically make it entropic. If you want to do live things and keep them live, you have to keep them in the etheric world. But if you try, as soon as you bring it into this world, this is a world of death and destruction. You can be much more efficient about how it is done, and you can keep things alive like in your garden, and you can work with the whole of that kind of life. but you can't make a pig's ear out of silk. Well, how's the silk? Because the
Works out of a sow's ear.
no, but it's the opposite way around that we want. Yeah. All right. I'm way far away from things, and we're losing the continuity of consciousness, so I'll have to be a little careful here. Chemical reactions in the mineral kingdom alone that are based only on chemical ether happen very quick. This is why there's such a big difference between organic chemistry and inorganic chemistry. The inorganic chemistry is dealing with something that is alive or has been a form that has been created while there was life in it. And so there you're dealing with whole molecules, and you're dealing, in some cases, with cells. And you have a very complex organization. Not only is it complex, it has a quality of enduring life. The ideal in the ethers is to have perpetual life, sort of like a plant. If we lived only in our vital body and didn't have a desire body, the desire body keeps the vital body working all the time. Then we do this and this and this, and it gets tired out. But if we had only a vital body with no desire body, we would be like people who would live to enormous ages, but we would be vegetative and we would not be spiritually awake, not be spiritually vital, vivid, doing things. Sometimes there are changes that happen very rapidly in the etheric body, in the ethers, but they are due to someone having knowledge and magical power to be able to make those transformations quickly, and they're only done in very special cases and with great urgency. The life ether, which we want to talk about for a few minutes, is what gives us vitality. Now, from the physical point of view, if you take physiology or if you take food chemistry or anything like that, everything is based on calories, which is breaking down the energy that is released when it has been holding something together, like what we call a food. When what has been holding it together gets broken down and there's energy released, that is caloric energy. But vital energy is a very different thing. It is from the life ether and not from the chemical ether. It is a different state, etheric state altogether. So the Rosicrucian philosophy teaches that there are two types of food and two types of digestion. One is chemical, and it is best attained to by cooking food. If you cook food, it makes it more easily chemically digestible. But if you need the vitality is better gotten from live food. And so we're going to talk a lot about this in either tomorrow morning or tomorrow evening, but you can draw that energy off and you can rejuvenate your physical body through life ether. I try to do it every day. I take raw, fresh vegetable juice. One time I take green juice, another time I take carrot juice, and I make the juice with as little of aeration as possible and as little of heat as possible, because heat dries the ethers out. And the enzymes that relate to the ethers are also destroyed by the heat. So I make a juice, and as quickly as that juice is made, I chug-a-lug it. Because I'm not interested in digesting all the stuff that's in there. I'm interested in drawing the vitality off of it. And so that's what the life ether does. The life ether, like things in chemistry or inorganic chemistry tend to be geometric. Things that grow and live tend to be more supple. They tend to be more fluid. They tend to be more rounded. And this is because of the fluency of the life ether. And so the relationship of the vital body The life ether component of the vital body is what keeps our body soft. It keeps us capable of doing things and moving. As soon as the life ether is removed, what happens? Rigor mortis. The body turns into a stone, at least until the bacteria get to it, and then they release energy in another way. But, so what we're talking about is life, vitality. And what we're saying is that this is abundant in human beings because we have sacrificed the ability, like the plants, to take the vitality out of sunlight in order to be able to have desire, and in order to be able to be creative, we now have to depend on the plants, and so they serve us. They help us by giving their life and their form to us as food. But there used to be a time when we could draw energy straight from sunlight, and we could be almost immortal, like a plant, and we could live for very, very long times. In fact, we'll gain that power back again, but we'll gain it back in a much better way. We try to do that here every Sunday night. We try to draw from the region of life spirit, and we try to produce an etheric panacea for healing. We try to produce life, not only just take it from the sun, but we take it from the spirit that is behind the sun and produce new etheric life, which has some very amazing properties to it. This has been something that has been proven. I used to go on to a skeptic's website and argue back and forth then with the skeptics, and nobody ever had an answer to the fact of the etheric body leaving the physical body. There was a Harvard professor named Professor McDougall. He's just mentioned by the name McDougall in the Cosmoconception, that did an experiment and repeated it and published that at the moment of death, that the body loses 33 grams of weight that cannot be attributed to loss of vapor or the loss of gases or, for breathing out moisture or anything like that. And what he had done is weighed the two lower ethers of the vital body. And this experiment, it isn't, I don't know of any recent reproductions of it. It's just considered as fact in these days. In fact, a few years ago, about 10 years ago, there was a movie called 33 Grams with Sean Penn in it that there was an existential movie about life and death and losses at death. Yes?
I found great fascination in watching vegetables go through this process of either decomposing or drying, and then seeing some of their body do different things depending on how they're treated.
Yes. And that is a classic experiment that in some students for mystery schools are taught to do that. Rudolf Steiner does a lot with that. You are told to take a seed and differentiate it from a stone that looks exactly like it, which one is capable of producing life, and then you watch that seed become a plant, and then you watch the plant as the etheric life disappears and it yellows and then it loses its shape and all of that. That's an excellent exercise. The idea is that by looking carefully enough, you can discriminate the ethers from the physical substance, from the chemical substance. And when you see that, you can literally see the life leaving by seeing the effects in the physical, even if you don't have the etheric vision.
So can you I assume that the ether will either, if the vegetable is handled in a certain way, it will stay with the vegetable?
Yes, and it can even be drawn back. We're going to talk about that in either tomorrow morning or tomorrow night. We're going to talk about that, because life ether the ether that we're talking about now has a very strong relationship to water. So like if you go into the Willie Street Co-op and you see some plants that are getting limp, they spray them with water, and then from that water they're able to draw back for a while some of the vitality.
Richard, just quickly, the raw juicing community thinks that they're getting the benefit of juicing due to the nutrients, but in fact, it's the life.
Yes, yes. They're getting better benefits of the nutrients also, but the life is what counts. Yeah. Anything that lives grows. It grows like a plant which does not have a desire body, or which is always trying to use up the energy. A plant grows as long as it lives. And so it is the purpose of the life ether to grow. And this means that it has to propagate cells. And one of the chief functions, especially at the positive pole of the life ether, is propagation. And it does this always by division. There is a form, and that form is elastic. It's an etheric matrix that is produced by thought before we come to birth, or it is produced by the animal group spirits before the animals enter that form, and they grow into that form. But it is done by mitosis. It is done by cell division. It breaks into two, and each cell grows and becomes large, and more of the form is filled in. So this is one of the functions of the life ether, is life. Now, oh boy. Oh, we're already over an hour. Let's move on a little bit here. Let's say just a few words in general about the soul ethers, the higher ethers. They're called soul ethers for several reasons. One of the reasons is because they are related to the higher functions of consciousness. They are related to intuitions direct from the spirit. They're related to emotions. They are related to thoughts. And those are more spiritual qualities, more soulful qualities. They aren't just maintaining the vegetative process of the physical etheric organism. And they have direct connections with the higher vehicles. And with those direct connections, they are indeed soulful. And they are the means by which the essence of the experience that we have in the outer world is transported into the spirit, especially to the life spirit, where it is called intellectual soul, which is another reason why the two higher ethers are called soul ethers. There is yet another reason, and that is that unlike the chemical ether formation in the body and the life ether, the higher ethers within our control approach immortality, relatively speaking. A higher vehicle made of the light and reflecting ether can live for millennia. It comes back to us when we are reborn. So, they are called soul ethers, and that is their primary work. But they do have some biological functions. For example, the light ether is very little in the body of plants. And the light ether has to do with receptivity or deposit of light. And so the negative pole of the light ether is used in the plant to precipitate the substance that is called chlorophyll, which is how the etheric energy is taken from the sun into the vital body of the plant and eventually into the human vital body when the plant is consumed. life ether is what the sunlight becomes, or what is taken out of the sunlight, but in order for it to be brought into the life ether, it has to come through the process that involves chlorophyll. And that chlorophyll process is from the negative pole of the light ether. It's also the negative pole of the light ether is responsible for coloration, whether it is in plants or whether it is in humans or in animals. The colors of our eye, the tanning of our skin, all of those things are due to actions that are begun in the light ether. The positive pole is in plants, it's what is responsible for circulating fluids in a plant. A heart doesn't have a plant. A plant doesn't have a heart. It circulates its vital substances, and it does so under sort of what you might call a solar pump. And that that ability to take sunlight in and cause circulation is accomplished through the light ether. It's really fascinating, because this is a place where where material science considers people like ourselves crazy, because we say that the heart doesn't circulate the blood alone, that the light ether within the blood is responsible for some of the driving of the circulation of the blood. And this is proven, but it is ignored because people tend to ignore things that disagree with their outlook. In the early stages of the fetus, before there is a completed heart that can circulate, the blood circulates. And it is not circulated by venous circulation, where the veins contract and push the blood forward. It is just circulated, and there is no description for it, no explanation for it from material science. From spiritual science, it's a matter that through the light ether, there is a driving force. So that's one of the general qualities. The light ether is responsible for circulation. This is what makes the difference between cold-blooded animals and warm-blooded animals. I can remember one time walking in the mountains and almost putting my hand into what I thought was a strange colored stone, and it was a rattlesnake. And that rattlesnake did not strike because it was getting dark and it was getting cold. And it didn't have that light, and it didn't have all of that drive. I looked at him, and he looked at me, and he was beautiful. He was absolutely beautiful. All of the, like in between what looked like scales, it was all a lovely red-violet, beautiful thing. And, there are all sorts of things I have in the notes here that I'd love to talk about, but it's no good to talk too long. And we are already too long. The light ether is responsible for coloration, for pigmentation, and it's all done by the incidence of light. Sap in trees rises according to the incidence of light in the tree. There is evidence that it is heat that causes the sap to circulate, but the heat is a product of the light. And even on cold times, when there isn't a great deal of heat, the incidence of the light will still promote the circulation. And the same thing is true at the opposite season. In autumn, the leaves will drop at a certain time. They'll drop quicker if there's a frost, but they will drop at a certain time. You can stay in the 80s or 90s all the way into November. The leaves will still drop because of the incidence of the light and the light ether that is being carried through it. In animals that are very far north, and when the sun gets very far south, they turn white. Snowshoe rabbits are like that. Polar bears are like that all the time. They don't have the pigmentation because there is not enough of the light ether for their bodies to respond to it. The positive pole of the light ether is responsible, at least in the physical body. Tomorrow night we're going to talk about the spiritual parts of the light ether, is responsible for sense perception. Not just light, but all sense perception. And so the plants have very little light ether in the constitution of their vital body, and they are not highly sensate. And any sensation that is directed by them is usually done by the group spirit functioning through them. It's an interesting thing if you look at the whole chart, the taxonomical chart of the evolutionary tree, to see how the senses come in with greater evolution. And it is a response to the environment. And the more conscious a state of being is, whether it's an animal or a human, the greater its appreciation of the universe extends beyond itself. If we take most of the senses that we have, like touching and tasting and smelling, they're very personal. They put you on a lower level. But something like vision or something like hearing is at a great distance. We can see stars that are far, far, far away. And so the light ether is that in our etheric body that gives us an appreciation and allows us to reach beyond ourselves, which is another reason why they are soul ethers, because they extend our being. Just a very few things to say about the reflecting ether. The reflecting ether is the highest of the four ethers, and it is associated with thought and memory. And the polarization in the reflecting ether is extreme. And it is more distributed. We know from the researches of Roger Sperry at Stanford Institution and people who have followed after him that the functioning of the right and left hemispheres of the brain is different. Not the motor functions, but what you do with the right and left hemispheres. One is more attuned to the positive pole of the reflecting ether, and it's more involved with logical thought. The other is more with the negative pole of the reflecting ether, and it is with imagination. Rosicrucian philosophy teaches that both are necessary for complete thought. Imageless thought without an imagination is an incomplete thought, because we are meant to be creative beings, and we are meant to carry our thoughts all the way to a conclusion and to fulfill things. The negative pole of reflecting ether is where we have the breath record. Everything that we have ever done is carried in with the ethers in the air, and it gets impressed on the negative pole of the reflecting ether, and everyone has a photographic memory. If you learn to get into certain states where you're not too harshly concentrated, but where you're not just spaced out either, but where you're mildly removed from hard concentration, you can learn to focus into the negative pole of the reflecting ether, and you can see all sorts of things from different periods in your childhood. I had one day that just about knocked me over. I was doing something like washing dishes or something relatively mindless, and all at once in my consciousness I was walking through the cornfield as a child, and the leaves of the corn were brushing against me, and they were harsh and cutting, and the pollen was falling down on my neck, and it was itching, and I saw things, and I realized things that I didn't realize then as a child. And we have all of these things. This is one of our objectives, is to have complete memories. And these memories are not just things that happen, but attitudes and everything else that was in the air. Because if we have this kind of memory, we can reap all of the experience from our life, and that becomes soul food. It becomes soul food through which we become more awake, more aware, and we have greater strength so that we in spirit can do what we want to do and hopefully do what we do in harmony with the purposes of the cosmos. The other pole of the reflecting ether is involved with thought. It doesn't do the thinking, but it does something like thinking. It ramifies thought. Thought is done in the mind, in the concrete mind. But it doesn't do all of the drudge work. A thought is thought in the mind, and then it's projected into the positive pole of the reflecting ether in the etheric brain, and all the possibilities are carried out. I had a friend once that was trying to write music, and he went to take a nap. It was in something like a semi-trance-like state, halfway between asleep and awake, and he found that with his mind, he could start a voice in a fugue going, and he could add another voice. And he got all the way up to 3 voices going at the same time, and he got so excited that he lost it all and didn't get it back again. But these are the kinds of things that are initiated in the mind and then carried out, because it's wasteful of the mind to try to carry out all the possibilities in concrete thought. For example, I had another friend that was trying to solve one of those poser kinds of problems that you can't figure out. It could be this, it could be that, it could be that, and there are many possible solutions. And he went to sleep with that, and he woke up focused in the reflecting ether, and it was just like, he said, throwing a stone in the water, and it splashed out in all directions, and he could see all the ramifications of one single thought which was trying to solve that problem, and they all initiated and ramified out of the so what we think is what comes to our waking consciousness is only a very small amount of what is ramified in the etheric brain. And what we think, a lot of that doesn't even get to the etheric brain. So what we're talking about here is, the obvious thing of this is that if you are a mystical student, you started, in our case, we started in the morning before we are really in our physical body. We learn to think outside of the body. Because if you think when you're inside the physical body, you can do it, but the quality of thought is not the same, and it's not attuned to spiritual reality as much as when you're thinking outside the body. But when you think in the body, you have brain damage. I think it's 10,000 each day of thinking, you lose 10,000 brain cells. And with each glass of beer or with each glass of wine or whiskey that you take, it's about the same amount as one day's worth of thinking. So every time you take a drink, you're taking one day off of the end of your thought life, and senile dementia will come to visit you at a much earlier age than other people. So one more little thing about the poles of the reflecting ether, and then tomorrow night we'll go into it much more deeply and much more usefully. And that is, it's possible, and not only possible, but likely, that you specialize in one pole of the reflecting ether over the other. For example, people who are very great abstract thinkers often have a difficult time visualizing because they lose their stream of thought, or the line of thought that they're trying to follow out in abstract, when they get into the visualization quality of the negative pole of the reflecting ether. On the other hand, if you are a mnemonist, back in the 80s, there was a wonderful book by a mnemonist. I don't know the name of it. I'll try to get it for anybody who wants it. And this man was one of those people that could look at open spread of a phone book, look at it for 10 seconds, and then tell you back every name that was on the open pages of the phone book. And he was asked how he did it, and he said, what I do is I picture myself walking down the street, and there are post boxes, and the names are on each of the post boxes, and that is what happens when you get into the negative pole, the reflecting ether. Everything is pictorial, and you do things in that wise. And I have another friend who had a photographic memory, and he could go back to any page of the book and turn it over. And then he tried to be a draft dodger, and he took something to alter his mind so that it would seem like he was crazy. And when he did that, he lost his photographic memory for life. And it was really quite something. He's still quite a bright man. I see him on a pretty regular basis. Interesting man. All right. We have, yes, there are flows and there are forms that are in the light ether and in the reflecting ether. But the spiritual qualities are much more important than the flow and form, that as in the two lower ethers. Tomorrow we will go in a very practical way into literally building the soul body by utilizing the properties of the two soul ethers. And for now we'll close with the Rosicrucian student's prayer. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Sorry for being so long. It's hot.
I think some of us asked too many questions.
I actually like that better, except that it's very hard to keep a line of thought that one thing resolves into another. Because it's amazing what is given to you when people ask questions. I think that's a very special case of when two or more are gathered in my name, I am there also. And when there is a questioner and a respondent, the Christ is there as the third, and things come out that would never come out otherwise.
When I was reading during the dinner hour, it was greatly helpful in understanding what you were saying today.
Okay, yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah.
I'll keep reading some more for tomorrow.
Okay.